this is such a global problem that we need to be able to communicate with each other, to be able to trade across jurisdictions, to trade across time zones is really, really important. Now, one of the challenges, and if you could kind of articulate it, because I'm already setting up Bo for an answer, but one of the challenges is around the NDCs. If you've got in a particular country a carbon, they want to demonstrate that that's being attributed to the country, but that country may not need it. Actually, in some ways, a lot of the developing markets who have lots of trees and the potential for a lot of markets want credits for that, but those credits could be applied in other places better. So could you kind of help unpick that challenge? And then I think it'd be interesting to go back over to Bo on how he, in a little more detail to unpack how they've basically overcome that challenge. I think I'll start with Christine, and then we'll go to Lorenzo on that. Christine, please.
Thank you very much. I actually suggested Lorenzo to go first.
Okay. Well, look, why don't we shoot over to Lorenzo? Yeah, I should be reading my text box. So, Lorenzo, I'm going to hand over to you and see if you could kind of address that one, and then we'll go over to Bo.
No, for sure. I mean, look, I think you're exactly right in highlighting that as a problem, and maybe just to get us all on the same page. The issue that we have here is that countries who are, party to the Paris Agreement, if within your country, let's say you are Brazil, you sell a voluntary carbon credit to, say, a Swiss company, the question is, who's going to claim that? Is it going to be then Brazil, or is it going to be then Switzerland? And as a Swiss company, you would think, well, if this is part of, one of a company headquartered in Switzerland, there's the danger here that you would have the double counting. So that same carbon credit would then count towards Brazil's NDC as well as Switzerland's NDC. And this is obviously a big issue. And I think it's very important here in making sense of this to divide up two issues. There's anyone who's buying this in a compliance market versus a voluntary market. And when we're talking about the voluntary market, you're really talking about, as the name suggests, companies and others that are doing this on a voluntary basis. And companies, as we know, are not party to the Paris Agreement. So I think that the kinds of solutions that we're talking about here and that Bo is spearheading really help resolve a really important issue here, which is that as a corporate, you should have no issue in being able to buy the credit from Brazil, count it towards your own, net zero or carbon neutrality claims, but that from an accounting perspective, from an NDC perspective, that should remain with Brazil and not go, say, to Switzerland in the case that I highlighted. Of course, in the compliance market, that looks very different, in which case you do need as quote unquote corresponding adjustments, whether that be in CORSIA for the airlines, or indeed, as we think about Article 6 coming into play with ITMOs. But I think that this is a really important issue where we do need, and I think overlooked. I mean, as I mentioned in my opening remarks, we speak a lot about demand integrity, we speak a lot about supply integrity, but this accounting issue is fundamental, because if we don't get this right, we don't know what we're shooting for globally when it actually comes to net zero. And the only net zero that matters here is global net zero. It doesn't matter, frankly, whether we're talking about an individual company or a country. It's the global accounting that we need to have straight, and that's why this is such an incredibly important issue, and we need solutions to it.
That was incredibly articulate, Lorenzo. Thank you very much on that. And again, we can't have literally carbon credits trapped in a country, because ultimately there's multiple things we need to achieve with those. Now, Bo, you touched on it a little bit, but you've put together, from what I understand, a way of being able to, I think you started with, you picked a small country to do a prototype on, China. Nothing like, everything China does is big. So, instead of starting with like Liechtenstein or with Luxembourg, you decided to go with China. And obviously, but it's important because China, the United States, EU, all matter, India, all these countries are profound. So it's quite impressive that you started. But from what I understand, that you're able to actually take high quality carbon credits where China can still get the benefit of them, but still be able to transfer them onto the exchange to either a corporate or, and what I also like to know is when you talk us through that, that's great, but I'm also kind of curious to know if I'm the CFO of a corporation and I need offsets for my company, will I at some point even be able to do those orders maybe on my smartphone as opposed to even, but that's getting a little bit down the road. Can you first talk us through how you've overcome this accounting issue? That's the big issue.
Thank you, Michael. And Lorenzo was exactly articulating the issue. It's a little bit ironic is that Paris Agreement with NDC is a great achievement, but at the same time, it inadvertently put a carbon voluntary emission credit with the nationality. They should not have, because this is really a global issue. It needs a global effort to tackle it, but NDC made it as a national ownership. We actually created the system with initial testing on the China side to utilize carbon registry and blockchain technology. So that's actually very powerful. I'll start from the first batch, how it worked. It really is a central SOE developed a winter project in China's Winter Olympics city in China that is going to go up for Winter Olympics soon. And then going through the whole certification process to become China's voluntary emission reduction. Remember, we're talking about voluntary emission reduction. We're not talking about allowance market. So such a voluntary emission reduction is recorded on China's National Voluntary Emission Reduction Registry. And then here is the registry becomes extremely important. It is a core place to avoid double counting in the whole system. China has developed such infrastructure, but for those countries, actually there are a fair amount of countries do not have the National Voluntary Emission Reduction Registry yet. And I think the World Bank's efforts and some other private sector solution also plays an important role. And then when you have this voluntary emission reduction registered in China's carbon registry, we worked with the local voluntary emission state-owned exchange so that such a voluntary emission reduction is frozen in China's carbon registry. By freezing means that this carbon voluntary emission reduction was a real one, was registered in China's system, but is not utilized for other commercial trading or other voluntary net zero activity in China anymore. So this is the critical point number one. Point number two is blockchain technology, and then in the format of similar to American depository receipt or what we call a digital depository receipt, in combination, put these assets, which is essentially voluntary emission reduction, stays in China's registry, and then put that as underlying assets and in depository, and then issue a digital receipt on CTX, which we are a licensed platform in Singapore, regulated by Monetary Authority of Singapore. And then Singapore government is just fantastic in terms of being proactive, progressive on the digital space. So we issued this digital token, what we call a Carbon Neutrality Token, and every one token is corresponding to 1 ton of a carbon emission, voluntary emission reduction credit from China that was certified by qualified entity that was registered and frozen on China's carbon registry. Now, we sold this to the international community. And then when the international community, whichever corporate, for example, a Swiss company, bought this token and then used that to do a voluntary net zero effort for their carbon footprint of their office building, for example, that creates, from the global perspective, it really is offsetting globally neutralization efforts for their voluntary carbon footprint. So this way that we can help globally to achieve the net zero efforts on a voluntary basis, but at the same time do not create an issue for the NDC as we speak for today. So we rolled out these efforts over the past 2 months, and has been quite interesting to see various people come to us to say, hey, this is very interesting. And then We wanted to do it, and then historically we did not have ways to do it. Now you build the whole system with the national registry, and then with the digital technology blockchain to keep track of everything, and then to safeguard the integrity. We're hoping this technology can bring scale to solve the problem Lorenzo articulated so well.
Yeah, no, Bo, that's brilliant. And it brings up a couple key issues. One is when Christine was talking about, the importance of a just transition and to make sure that emerging markets get covered. This unlocks their opportunity to both get the credit for it, but also be able to help others with it, which is quite impressive. The integrity issue around blockchain, as Dr. Ma pointed out, is absolutely critical as well, and it helps capture that.